Hello, good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jose Ivan Rodriguez Sanchez. I'm a research scholar here at the Becker Institute, and welcome you all to the halls of the Becker Institute. Also, we are very pleased in partnership with Linda Lorelle Media, Jean Becker, our friend Stan Merrick, and Civil Dialogues in the organization of this stellar panel that is going to explore the post-elections. As we know, on November 5, we had the US presidential election with a rather surprising result, primarily due to the difference in the number of votes of the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, although it was always an election too close to call. Past elections, nonetheless, questions arise about the causes and the consequences of this result. For example, why did the votes of Black and Hispanic men increase for Donald Trump? Has the US economy really performed that poorly in recent years? What is going to be the economic impact of this new presidency based on the protectionist politics that this government wants to do? Also, what's going to be the impact for other economies such as Mexico, China, and Europe? How will the Trump administration confront criminal groups along the US-Mexico border to reduce fentanyl trafficking? Will there be any significant tax changes for middle-income Americans and companies? So we have a lot of issues, of course, what's going to happen with the policies about immigration. So there is so much to talk about. Of course, our center has been examining specific issues such as immigration, trade, and the binational relationship between the US and Mexico in depth for many years. But we need to have a broader discussion on many issues that surely are in our minds. And that's why we have this event with Linda Lorelle Media and Civil Dialogues. Although we will discuss many issues in this conversation, let me put in a word about the main subject matter of our center. In the case of Mexico, we know that it is the main trading partner of the US, and many potential decisions of the president-elect could affect that relationship and negatively impact the North American region. In 2026, we will have the review and revision of the USMCA. It seems that Donald Trump will put enormous pressure to seek changes to the automotive rules of origin that would affect the industry of cars, not only in the US, but also in the region. Besides, Donald Trump has said that he will impose between a 10 and 20% across the board tariff on all $3 trillion worth of US goods imports and a 60% tariff on all Chinese goods. This, of course, will affect the Mexican, but of course the US too. So another major topic is immigration. President-elect Donald Trump has vowed to build huge detention camps, implement mass deportations on a scale never seen before, hire thousands more border agents, and restore the Remain in Mexico program, among many other policies. However, he has not answered questions about how he would arrest undocumented immigrants or how he would fund those plans. Furthermore, a major point here is the negative economic impact that these policies could generate in the US. So there are a lot of things that we can discuss today. So I will hand the microphone over to Linda, but to have this stellar panel. But first, we have Jean Becker is going to tell you some words about these issues. And thank you again for being here today. And I hope we are going to have a very, very good conversation. Thank you.
I want to start by thanking all of you for not staying home for the Texans game. I think we'll get you home for the second half. We promise. Okay, I think most of you know that I was former President Bush, the first George Bush's chief of staff for 25 years of his post-presidency. So we're just going to talk a little bit about him to set the table for our outstanding panel tonight. I think we all knew, without a doubt, that on Election Day, half of America would either go to bed or wake up the next morning really mad about what happened the night before. I just didn't expect me to be one of them. I didn't think I would be in that group. I confess to you, so I guess I just revealed who I voted for. I confess to you, I'm in desperate need of civil dialogue. In many ways, I'm really the perfect person to kick off our dialogue tonight, since when the 41st President of the United States, that would be Houston's very own George Herbert Walker Bush, lost in 1992, I was working in the White House. Specifically, I worked for First Lady Barbara Bush. I was one of her deputy press secretaries. So how did we react to the election? For the next 6 weeks, the East Wing went out drinking heavily every single night. I have never drank so much in my life. I'm serious, we went out drinking every single night. For one thing, we were all facing unemployment. Our president had lost, our world had come crashing to an end. Eventually, we did find our way back to normalcy, led by none other than George and Barbara Bush. The morning after the election, Mrs. Bush had her entire staff upstairs to the White House residence for a cup of coffee and a pep talk. She was amazing. She outlined everything that she needed to do and wanted to do before they left office on January 20th, including the very next day, she was flying to Houston to find a place for them to live when they came back January 20th. That compared to me, who almost didn't get out of bed the day after, but here's Barbara Bush, getting ready for their new life. As for the president, I'm going to let his words speak for himself. This is what George Herbert Walker Bush wrote in his diary the night he lost the election to Bill Clinton. It's 12:15 in the morning, November 4th. The election is over. It's come and gone. It's hard to describe the emotions of something like this. The job is not finished, and that kills me. Now into bed, prepared to face tomorrow. I love this. This is advice he's giving himself. Be strong, be kind, be generous of spirit, be understanding, and let people know how grateful you are. Don't get even. Comfort the ones I've hurt and let down. Say your prayers and ask for God's understanding and strength. Finish with a smile and some gusto, and do what's right and finish strong. I know, I heard that. Now I'm going to read his radio address to the nation the following Saturday after he lost. Way back in 1945, Winston Churchill was defeated at the polls. He said, "I've been given the order of the boot." That is the exact same position in which I find myself today. I admit this is not the position I would have preferred, but it is a judgment I honor. Having known the sweet taste of popular favor, I can more readily accept the sour taste of defeat because it is seasoned for me by my deep devotion to the political system under which this nation has thrived for 2 centuries. Ours is a nation that has shed the blood of war and cried the tears of depression. We have stretched the limits of human imagination and seen the technologically miraculous become almost mundane. Always, our advantage has been our spirit, a constant confidence, a sense that in America, the only things not yet accomplished are the things that have not yet been tried. President-elect Clinton needs all Americans to unite behind him so he can move our nation forward. But more than that, he will need to draw upon this unique American spirit. There are no magic outside solutions to our problems. The real answers lie within us. We need more than a philosophy of entitlement. We need to all pitch in, lend a hand, and do our part to help forge a brighter future for this country. On January 20th, Barbara and I will head back to Texas. For us, there will be no more elections, no more politics, but we will rededicate ourselves to serving others because, after all, that is the secret of this unique American spirit. With this spirit, we can realize the golden opportunities before us and make sure that our new day, like every American day, is filled with hope and promise. I think you can see why I called my latest book about President Bush, it's called Character Matters. And we need to keep that in mind. Now more than ever, we need to get out of bed, no matter who you voted for, get out of bed, and we need to get back to life and get back to work. And I get asked a lot these days, before the election, after the election, what I think President Bush would say about our current climate, political climate. Well, on November 30th, it will be 6 years since he died, so I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put words into his mouth. But I have a pretty good guess on what I think he would say. I've been quoting him a lot lately. This happened after 9/11, and he and Mrs. Bush were hosting some people at their home, and it was some young couples, young families, and a couple of the mothers just sort of went a little crazy and started talking about, one in particular said to President Bush, "You have no idea how hard it is to be a parent today. You have no idea. You have no idea. Our world is turned upside down. No one's ever seen anything like this." She's talking about 9/11. Where do we go from here? You have no idea, sir, how hard this is. And I watched him count to 10. And then he started with the Great Depression, talked about how difficult that was, and then he went into World War II, talked a long time about World War II, how the entire world was at war, talked about the dropping the nuclear bomb, talked about the fact that he was shot down, and then he talked about the 1950s and the Cold War, and unfortunately, most of you are old enough to remember the nuclear war drills when we got under our desk at school because we thought that would save our life. But he really spent most of the time talking about the 60s and how difficult the 60s were. 3 major assassinations, one president, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, the Vietnam War. And President Bush said to these families, this is when I was raising my kids, is during the 1960s. He said, and he basically looked at them and said, life is complicated. These are not the worst of times. And he said, we will get through this. We will. And he said, the only reason I'm not bringing up the Civil War is because I was not alive during the Civil War. He said, all these other things happened during my lifetime. And he's right. And that's what he would say today if he were here. He would say, okay, you can moan and groan about the election and moan and groan about whatever you want to moan and groan about. He did use this term a lot, so I'm just going to use it. He would say, pull up your big girl pants or big boy pants and get back in the game and be a good American citizen. So I think that's what he would say. I think it's what he said after 9/11, and that's what he would say now. Before I turn this over to the panel, I do want to give you a brief update on civil dialogues because we started here in February talking about immigration. That was our inaugural event. Since then, we talked about immigration again at the LBJ Library. We've talked about climate change, the importance of bipartisanship. That was at the Clinton Library, the importance of public service, and we talked about the Middle East. If nothing else, you cannot call Linda and me cowards. We will talk about just about anything. We've been to Austin, College Station, Little Rock, Washington, D.C., and in February, thanks to one of our panelists, I believe we're headed to St. Louis to do a partnership with the Kinder Institute at the University of Missouri. We have a lot more ideas and potential events on the horizon. Among the topics we plan to tackle, the role of the media in a constitutional democracy, and how do we fix the divide in our country between urban and rural areas. We also have plans to visit a number of high schools and college campuses. At one point, when Linda and I first conceived of Civil Dialogues, we assumed this would be an election year project. Obviously, that's not the case. More than ever, we need to figure out as a society how to talk with each other, listen to each other, befriend each other, and hopefully find some common ground. We got this. We can do this, but we're going to need to work at it. So at that point, I'm going to turn this over to Linda. As you all know, she was an Emmy Award-winning journalist who anchored the evening news at NBC's Houston's NBC affiliate for 17 years. We both went to University of Missouri School of Journalism. Today, she is CEO and executive producer of Linda Lorelle Media, a video production and communications consulting firm. Linda, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, my Civil Dialogues partner in crime. Is my mic on? Can you hear me okay? Great. So, Jean, I have to say, I was particularly struck by the words from President Bush that you just shared, these specific words. The real answers lie within us. We all need to pitch in, lend a hand, and do our part to help forge a brighter future for this country. What is our part in a constitutional democracy? I think it's a question worth serious consideration. We now know that, according to US News and World Report, close to 90 million Americans who were eligible to vote sat out the November 5th election, arguably the most consequential presidential election of our lifetime. They did not engage in the democratic process by casting their votes. Only they know why. I would argue that our charge now is to get all of them and the rest of us to listen, learn, and engage with each other and the democratic process without fear of judgment or demonization. That is the mission of Civil Dialogues, to create a safe space for constructive civil conversation on some of the most important, contentious topics of the day, and to leave those who participate, that would be all of you in the room and online, feeling seen, heard, and empowered to continue engaging in civil dialogue. So tonight, that is our goal, giving you an opportunity to express your thoughts and concerns about the topics discussed, keeping in mind that the mission of Civil Dialogues is to give everyone the language and tools to talk about political topics in a civil manner. We ask that you speak with respect for each other, no demonization, no vitriol, just dialogue. We have a stellar panel to help us unpack some of the challenges that lie ahead for our nation as the new administration prepares to take office. Immigration, asylum policies, economic stability, inflation, a changing media landscape, just to name a few. As we begin the evening with our panel discussion, please be thinking of your questions, because we will devote a significant amount of time to make sure that as many of your voices as possible are heard. And for those of you who are joining us online, please put your questions in the chat. We will also be asking those questions here in the room. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the evening. Dr. Jay Sexton is the Rich and Nancy Kinder Chair of Constitutional Democracy and Professor of History at the University of Missouri. He spent almost 2 decades at Oxford University in England as first a grad student and then director of the Rothermere American Institute. Dr. Sexton specializes in the political and economic history of the 19th century, especially the era of the American Civil War. His most recent book, A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History, argues that international forces have shaped the course of U.S. history during its greatest moments of transformative change. Please welcome Dr. Jay Sexton. Thank you, Jay. Ms. Elizabeth Mendoza has practiced immigration law exclusively since 1993. She is a graduate of Rice University and the University of Houston Law Center and is a research collaborator right here at the Baker Institute. Mendoza represents immigrants and their families in a multitude of ways, including removal defense in immigration court, appeals and motions, citizenship, work permits, deferred action, and much more. She has also spent a considerable amount of time lobbying at the Texas Capitol and in Washington, D.C. for comprehensive immigration legislation. Please welcome Ms. Elizabeth Mendoza. And Mr. John Gable is co-founder and CEO of All Sides, a technology platform that rates media bias and provides information from all sides of the political spectrum. He served on the original teams for Microsoft Office and Mozilla at Netscape, the browser now known as Firefox. John also co-founded KaviCorp, a web-based collaboration that was sold to Higher Logic. And in a previous life, he was a professional political campaigner and executive director in the 1980s when he worked for the Republican National Committee, as well as for candidates for US President, US Senate, US Congress, governor, and local campaigns. Please welcome Mr. John Gable. And I have to especially thank John and Jay for flying in. John flew in from San Francisco, Jay from Columbia, Missouri, and Liz, we know you came from another part of Houston today. We appreciate all of you so much for being here. Okay, I'd like to start this way. I want each of you to share some opening comments about what you are hearing from your constituents post-election as it relates to your area of expertise. And Jay, I want to start with you. As the director of the Kinder Institute on Constitutional Democracy, you spend a lot of time with your students. What are you hearing from them in the aftermath of the election, and what words of hope can you offer to the half of the country that believes our constitutional democracy is at risk?
Well, thanks for that. I wish that I would have heard the H.W. Bush comment earlier. I would have just given that to the students. I think it'd be much better. But I mean, hey, yeah, I know some of you were probably either crestfallen or maybe elated at the results, but imagine if you're an 18, 20-year-old college student and this is your first election and those emotions are amplified. So I guess I tell them a couple of things and just really want to listen to what they say, but help tell them that, hey, have some perspective. The United States has been around for 248 years. We're soon to celebrate our semi-quincentennial. The 250th will be in 2 years from now. And every single election that we've had is the most important election for the future of the democracy. Of course, sometimes people at the time are right. Like the election of 1860 was pretty important. Election of 1932 was pretty important. We would probably all have our favorites to throw into the hopper. But a lot of elections which people thought were really, really important actually weren't. I think that the elections our era looks most like are those late 19th century elections when people lost those, they thought the world was coming to an end. And we look back at that, we're like, what are you guys all worked up about? The issues you were fighting over don't really make sense. So perspective, that helps. Second thing I think young students need to know, and I actually think they do know this instinctively, is that in our era of politics as theater, that elections are entertainment, that this isn't really the only show in town. It may not even be the most important bit of our constitutional democracy. Our political system, the way we organize ourselves, our society, our economy, is far more complicated and multi-dimensional than election results on their own can entail or can change. So students oftentimes want to talk about what can they do next. And the thing I say is, don't start planning 2026 midterms. For God's sake, we have enough of that. Think about your local community. Think about the organizations you can be engaged in. Think about the constitutional order more generally. Think about the safeguards that are in place and the role that citizens can play to ensure that those safeguards remain in place. So put elections in their wider context. And then the last thing I would say to students, because really I'm just a history professor, so we talk about long-term change, those sort of subterranean structural forces that kind of operate oftentimes independent of election results, or at least the daily grind of our modern elections. And I'd say, sometimes election results and elections conceal the most important things that are happening beneath the structures. And in our era, surely we're in the midst of a really significant change, and hasn't mattered as much who's in charge or who wins the elections. Just think about the transition of our political economy from one marked by free trade to one marked by tariffs, free markets to national industrial policy, open borders, high immigration, pro-immigration to now anti-immigration. And then in the foreign policy realm at the Baker Institute, no one needs me to say this, an internationalist international order to now one that's marked by volatility and competition. And those changes have happened regardless of who wins elections in the last decade or so. And so we might think structurally about what's driving our political change and map the elections on them, but don't live and die with the roller coaster. That's the most important thing for the students to note.
And for all of us, I think, the historical perspective always helps sort of, lower the temperature just a tad. So Liz, I want to hear from you about, you are literally on the ground with your clients who I know, because we've chatted about this, have been calling you. You've been busy pretty much nonstop since the election. What are you hearing from your clients? What are their primary concerns? What are you telling them?
There's a lot of fear and a lot of concern, and not just from folks who are undocumented American citizens, permanent residents, calling and asking, what's going to happen to my wife? What's going to happen to my son? He's in the military. He only has a green card. Is he going to get in trouble? So it's a lot of fear and it's a lot of concern because they're hearing this non-stop discussion about immigration policy and the changes that are coming down the pike. So I've been trying to allay fears as best I can, but be pragmatic and be realistic. Some conversations have been really difficult to have. I've had to tell some people that certain strategies that we thought we could pursue, we can't. I've had to tell other people that there's a real risk that certain benefits that we thought that we could obtain for them, it's probably not going to happen. So it's a lot of fear and it's a lot of concern. Some people I've had to tell them, you're fine, no worries, you're going to be okay. And I've had some people tell me, I kind of knew that, but I felt afraid. I'm worried about what's going to happen to my family, to this person who is my right-hand man at work. How's this going to affect my business? How's this going to affect, my community, my church? So it's just been a lot of fear and concern.
And the children, I was reading something this morning about how some of the schools are now having to bring in counselors for children who are afraid and don't know what to expect. And the question for them is, well, what do I do when I go home and my parents aren't there because they've been deported?
Well, one of the conversations that me and a lot of colleagues had to have in our community back in 2017, 2018 was just getting people prepared for a possible family separation, having conversations with parents about them getting a power of attorney, having conversations with the principal of their children's schools, finding a trusted person who they could discuss, these are the medications that my children takes, this is where my child goes to school, this is where their important documents are, birth certificates, things of that nature. Literally getting prepared for the possibility that You know, I'm going to drop my child off in the morning and I may not be able to pick him up. So those have been hard conversations that are resuming since November 5th.
So John, you and I we had a really great conversation earlier today, just sort of talking about just many aspects of the election. I want you to start your comments, however, with talking a little bit about the media landscape. I'm a big proponent of John's site, allsides.com. I will say it so he won't have to promote it himself. But what's so great about it is that the site rates media bias, and you literally can go to the site and see a news story of the day, pick whatever it is, and see that same story as told from a left-leaning perspective, a center-leaning perspective, and a right-leaning perspective. And it's so interesting because you can tell almost by just reading the headline where they're coming from. It's really, it's a great site, so allow me to pat him on the back. And now I want you to talk a little bit more about what you are seeing and hearing in your world, what people's concerns are, and then later on I want to get into sort of the media's role and the role it has played in this election and what it will continue to play going forward.
Yeah, but it's fun being in an organization where we really do have everybody in our company. We consciously are not based in San Francisco. I am, but we're all over the country, in rural and urban and blue and red and purple, and our company itself has people all across the spectrum. And I'll say that this year, I mean, we've been around for a while. This year we've had more heated arguments amongst each other than we've had in the past. There was something more going on. But we actually, one of the things our team wrote, we had reflections right after the election where all the different people in the team wrote just a couple of paragraphs or about their own reflections. And it was fascinating reading it, seeing the gamut from fear to excited to not sure to this is good, that's not good, to concerns about pretty much a gamut. And when you read that, you actually begin to appreciate each other a little bit more because we all are in filter bubbles. We all tend to see people who agree with us and we get that information. And we know from studies at University of Colorado and otherwise that even if you know that, even if we know that, we all become more extreme as a result. We all become much less tolerant to the other idea. And the big change to me is really kind of what Jay was talking about in terms of the environment, the landscape. It's less about the news media, it's more about the internet and the way we get information and interact overall. And whether it's podcasts or social media or search engines or all of that. And that's the big shift. And that big shift is what's making us more emotional because we technologists know how to manipulate people better than we ever did. Like, we really can do it. I remember being told as in kindergarten about how subliminal advertising, little pictures and pictures might get you to buy something. That really bothered me as a kid. That ain't nothing compared to what we can do now. That's just nothing. And so we really have a lot of people who make a lot of money or want you to vote a certain way or be ever, who make success for them by getting us emotionally angry and terrified at each other and about the situation. And that both gives us an unreal idea of what's going on, but it also makes the real situation worse. And so I'm the pull up your big kid pants, I think that's what we got to do. We need to think about how to strengthen our society, not just about who won this election. Because if it's just about whether my team beats the other team, that's not democracy. Sooner or later, my team will lose, the other team will win. That's not the way to strengthen democracy. I mean, fight for policies, that's what we do, but there's something more we can do as well, and that's what I think we should think about a little bit about and talk about, which is totally about civil dialogues and more, because that's where the real work comes in.
You're agreeing, you're shaking your head in agreement there, Jay. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the sign of a healthy, functioning democratic system is that the losers of elections accept the results and then roll up the sleeves and get to work not only on trying to win the next campaign, but actually try to make things better. and the art of governing as opposed to campaigning. That's what we should put a lot more focus on. And then the role of citizens, not just as passive recipients of being governed, but as active participants in the democratic process. And there have been moments in the past when I think that would be how I would characterize American democracy. So it can definitely happen again.
In your opening comments, you mentioned something about the guardrails that are there for our institutions. So a lot of people are concerned, I'm one of them, about the guardrails potentially going away. When you look at, and Jean and I were talking about this before the event started, the question of some of the rather extreme picks that President-elect Trump is putting forth right now, what looks extreme to a lot of people, that they could potentially those guardrails could potentially not hold up. So when you look at it from a perspective of someone with your background in history and understanding how our democracy works, what do you say to somebody like me who is really concerned about that? And what would you say? And then what, as a concerned citizen, for those of us who want to be engaged in the process, what can we do to ensure that the guardrails do stay in place?
No, it's a $1 million question right now at this moment. It's a very key one. First thing is, don't freak out, everyone, if you're a Harris voter or you're not pro-Trump. It's not unusual for one party to control the White House, the Congress, and the Senate. That's happened multiple times in our kind of recent era, last 25 years. It happened for Biden. It happened first Trump administration. I think it happened for one of the Obama ones, et cetera. So that's not unusual. Second thing I'd say, taking the long kind of historical view, Senate approval, advice and consent of cabinet nominations, of presidential executive nominations, historically this has been one of the issues that has led to healthy, I think, intra-party and intragovernmental conflict and contestation. And so the fact that we're already seeing this just within hours after the announcement, I take that as a sign of health, that the system is working, that those guardrails are being imposed, rather than that we need to throw up our hands and say, what are we going to do? And in terms of what can citizens do on this issue, well, I'm afraid that this is now in the matter of high politics. So in the coming weeks, I'm not sure what citizens can actually do, but you can be more engaged on this question and understand that the election of not just presidents, but down ballot offices really, really, really matters. And that's one of the things I think that's really important to teach the students. That it's such a kind of cult of celebrity with who you vote for as your president. You got to remember that down the ballot absolutely matters. So I think there's a case to see the glass as being definitely half full.
So Liz, you have spent a lot of time at the state capitol and in DC trying to help move the needle on immigration reform. So what are you thinking now in this current climate with the Republicans holding all three branches of government? What are your thoughts on the legislative process?
My thoughts are that we're going to have another 4 years of missed opportunities to try and create meaningful change in immigration policy that serves the best interests of the United States. Our national security, our economic interests, securing the border, public health, being true to our history, being a nation of immigrants, that instead of us spending the next 4 years coming together in good faith to have civil dialogues about this very complex issue and trying to find common ground, that politics is once again going to get in the way. And instead of focusing on this multifaceted problem, we're going to focus like a laser on one component. Because that is
being the border.
Correct. And because unfortunately, both sides have engaged in that for decades. Not just one side, both. And so that is where I'm at right now. I don't feel hopeful right now that both sides can meet and try and craft some meaningful, comprehensive policy that serves our national interests. I think it's just going to be very, very focused on one component, and everything else will continue to decay. And that simply doesn't serve us. We need better immigration policy for all these different reasons, because all of those reasons together, they're important. Every single one of these factors is important, but you can't just focus on one and think you're done. It's complicated. So that's where I am right now, but I'm hoping to feel different in the next, maybe within the next several months. So I'm going to try to stay positive.
So our friend Stan Merrick, who's here tonight, and
Yes.
I'm going to come to him in the audience in a little bit, and all of you, I'm going to ask John one more question, and then I'm coming out here because I want to hear what you're thinking. And I know Stan's not going to want to hear that because he's been working on it for a long time, as you well know. So, John, where do you think the opportunities lie from a communications, information standpoint as we move into this new administration? Because when there's always going to be an opportunity.
Yeah.
So where do the opportunities lie?
There are actually some good signs. I started, as you know, dealing with this about 12 years ago. Started trying to figure out how to deal with the problem because I thought division was going to get a lot worse. And 12 years ago, nobody thought this was a real problem. And I make the analogy of addiction. We got a problem. The first step to get over that problem is recognizing we have a problem. Well, everybody knows we have a problem now. That's one of the things that everybody agrees with, is that there is a problem with division and communication and the way we do that dividing us. That's step one. What do you do after that? Well, the first thing you do is you blame the other side for the problem. It's a problem, but it's your fault. And I think we're beginning to mature out of that a little bit. It's still there, we just came out of an election, but I think that, anybody here who didn't like the choices or didn't like the results, I think we all know that what we've been doing hasn't been working. Just trying to get our group to beat that group isn't working. And so I think that we may be getting a little bit past that, and I see some good signs. So you see CNN and Politico making announcements. They're going to try to be a little bit less partisan and try to move a little bit closer to the center. It doesn't always go that well. When CNN CEO first said that CEO was around for maybe 2-3 months. But the CEO after that didn't say that, but they are making those changes. And then you see the LA Times and the Washington Post not making endorsement. A lot of people got upset about that and quit those companies, saying we need people to know what we really think. And they made the decision, popular or not, that you know what, that's not really the role of media. We need to help people decide for themselves. Some organizations that have moved more to the center have actually had financial success, because it's not just a matter of what we should do, it's actually what the financial incentives are. Newsweek used to be very partisan one side. They had a huge overhaul a number of years ago, and they have grown tremendously. And our own ratings have them center. They are sometimes populist left, populist right, a little bit sensational, but they do both. And so you can see both of those. We spent around $0 in advertising. We've been getting 60, 70, 79 million views a month. And not through any great campaigning marketing, but because people are looking for that. Schools are looking for that. Ground News is doing well. They use our bias ratings. The Free Press, from 2 women who were at the New York Times that were disappointed the New York Times was becoming more partisan. They've started something that's a little bit more, I wouldn't say libertarian, but they are kind of traditional liberal and also conservative, has been doing quite well. And so the big media, the people who own the power of communication, they don't want to change. And there is some change going on. And there's even financial indications that that's good. But it's not the media itself, it's also social media. It's also search engines. And when the algorithm started changing things in social media and in search engines, I was concerned. Nobody else seemed to be very concerned. AI could make it worse, but people are already concerned. So I think it's good that we're concerned up front. That I think there are great things you could do and some things that aren't, but we're becoming a little bit more media literate. And the media literacy is what's essential, not just in terms of going to school and understanding the different branches of government, but actually understanding how to get information and deal with this very fragmented world.
The whole media literacy conversation is one that we definitely want to have, and we're probably going to do it with University of Missouri School of Journalism next year. Okay, I'm coming out into the audience, and Stan, I'm going to come to you first, and then I want to hear what you guys are all thinking. So, what do you think when you hear Liz say that she's not very optimistic about getting something done?
Liz, you know, I can agree with you, but I don't want to. Because I'm in the construction business, and we're a large employer, 5,000 employees in 8 cities across the nation. The workforce shortage has never been worse. You know, we have a declining birth rate. We took vocational training out of our high schools 25 years ago. There's nobody here to do the work but the immigrants. Now, the fact that they're coming to fill the jobs is not right. We need border security, but we need a way to give these people a guest worker status to fill the jobs that are needed. Coming over, listening to NPR, what was it? Something like 400,000 Texans have Alzheimer's, suffer from dementia. Wow. Where are their caregivers going to come from? Where are the people working at MD Anderson that clean the bedpans, that clean the bill? Where are they going to come from? We're in a crisis. And I think people are starting to realize we're in a crisis. Now, what I want to see is border security. I mean, it's ridiculous that the drugs, the guns, whatever, but I do want some way to ID all the people, not only that are coming across, but that are already here. 10, 12, 20 million people, who knows, they're here. You don't have to get an ID to go to work anywhere in this country. You just show up. So we got to have border security. ID, we got to have reform the asylum. You know, one of the reasons, I don't know, I read this and I totally believe it because I have a lot of Latino employees. Trump carried the Latino vote because the Latinos who are here were so angry about all the Venezuelans getting humanitarian parole, getting a work permit, being able to work in the U.S., and then people that have been here 20, 30 years raising their families, they've been waiting for that, and they didn't get it. That's what carried the election. Third, we got to do something about DACA. We have all these wonderful kids, came here when they were under 16, that are worried, very worried about being deported. And there's another 1,700,000 of them, 1,700,000 who are eligible for the program if we'd reopen it. These kids could be nurses, they could be doctors, they could be firemen. I mean, they could fill so many of these jobs.
And we've educated them, and they were brought here. They were brought here by their parents.
The final thing is just something we call ID and tax. You know, if you've been here, let's say, picking up 5 years, you can pass a background check, and you come in, get right with Homeland Security, you get a temporary work, you get a guest worker permit, not a path to citizenship, you can't vote, but you can get a driver's license. You can renew it every 2 years, just like DACA. And I mean, if you offered this to the people who are here, they would line up to go to work for employers like me, who will, you know, mentor them, train them, match and pay payroll taxes. It's a no-brainer. It wouldn't cost the government 1 cent to round anybody up. They'd all go to work and we'd know who they are. You know, we didn't have facial recognition and digital fingerprints.
Well, but we have it now. But we have it now. And I think all of the different things that you're talking about speak to Liz's point about how complex the situation is, and you can't just focus on one, and hopefully it won't just be the one. Okay, who's got something to say? Excuse me. Yes, sir.
Just a question for the VC. I'm wondering what he thinks is the prospects of NVIDIA going to Taiwan for their semiconductors by April is.
Oh, wow. It's not my area of expertise. There is going to be some changes going on. And it's interesting, part of this discussion, it's like, there is a difference in campaigning where you make things as simple and one point as possible, and governing where nuance and all the details are important. And I think that we got to realize that sometimes the politics and the governing are intentionally different by the people doing it. So we don't know what's going to happen in a lot of these cases. I think that a lot of what happened in the election was saying very one-point strong things, overstating it in order to get coverage. If you're Donald Trump, the media is not on your side. So if you want to get the election to care about your issue, the electorate to care about your issue, you've got to say some crazy things about that issue so that everybody knows that you're the one who's going to fix that issue. So we'll see what that turns out to be governing. I'm hopeful that we can be a little bit more rational and nuanced in governing. But I don't think we should assume that don't get rhetoric confused with governing or rhetoric confused with results. They are often different. I don't know what's going to happen with that specific piece, but we'll see. I'm really not my area of expertise. It's really not my area of expertise, yeah.
Okay, who else? Now, I know you cannot be this quiet. Yes, okay.
A bunch of hands.
So what happens is it's always slow to start, and then in the last 10 minutes, like everybody's got their hand up. Yes.
Hi. You got it. It's a lot to take in, all of the change and the anger. What I was most learned most of all from the election is how angry half the country is and how forgiving they are as well, considering how the vote went. But it seems to me it speaks more of this conflict maybe between urban and rural America, the lack of understanding of what is going on in the provinces, so to speak. And all we hear about from the media is what's going on in the urban environment. So I think we're missing half the information, and maybe this is what the positive part of the election is all about.
You just validated one of the next civil dialogues that Jean and I are planning to do next year, and that's on the urban-rural divide, because I think you hit the nail on the head. Jay, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so I'm from a small town in western Kansas, and lived overseas for almost 20 years, and then came back to Missouri, central Missouri. And a lot has changed in rural America. I would add to your list, it's not just the rural urban, but the other thing that we've heard a lot about in the last 2 weeks is, of course, college educated and non-college educated. And there's a massive divide there. I would just say that I'm somewhat skeptical of how we tend to explain the motivations or voting behavior of rural Americans. I think if the New York Times depiction of them was read to them, they would be very surprised to hear that that's what their motives are. So all the more reason for a civil dialogues type event on this issue. Last thing I would say is last 50 years or so, the kind of political economy that we've had, there have been some groups of people that have been massive winners, and there have been other groups of people that have been massive losers, or they haven't won at the same pace as others. And so one of the good things that can come out of the election cycles, the last several elections actually, is an awareness of that and an adjustment of the political economy, because surely one of our biggest problems isn't just an urban-rural divide, but it's the distribution of wealth and power socioeconomically. And that's one of the reasons why I say it looks really similar to the late 19th century, when you had a massive gap between the haves and the have-nots. And there's evidence that both parties are aware of this and are changing their appeals and their policies. We'll see if the Republicans actually do that. They're certainly, in a campaign sense, they're doing it. I don't know if they're doing it yet in terms of governing, but one suspects that the future will see a very different kind of politics, one that looks a lot more like the mid-20th century than it looks like the last 50 years.
Jean, you have an online question. Did you turn it on? Okay.
having major
There it is.
technical issues over here. So I'm informing Linda publicly that at our next civil dialogues, I'll do the in-person people, and you're going to do online. But we have
Yes,
found,
ma'am.
so don't give, those of you online, don't give up. We're making progress. But we have our first question, which Liz is going to be for you. What will or might happen to the DACA people? And you've talked about that a little bit, but Barry wants to know.
Barry?
I think it's Barry.
Barry.
Yes, it's Barry. Okay.
So the legislation, the proposed legislation to provide a pathway to permanent residency for Dreamers in DACA has not advanced. The likelihood of it advancing in the next 4 years is very low. Miracles do exist, but it's very, very low. So I know that me and colleagues are going to focus like a laser on lobbying for DACA legislation because it's just languished under multiple presidential administrations. But currently it's tied up in litigation, and we don't know what the end result will be of the litigation. As of now, we haven't heard anything from the incoming president about supporting any kind of legislation for DACA. I think, again, the focus is border first, and then we'll talk about other components. So as of right now, I am not hopeful at all that we'll get any kind of meaningful legislation for Dreamers in DACA. But again, I hope I'm wrong, and I'm going to be fighting very hard to advocate for that.
Okay, I've got a question back here.
Linda, quickly, can I just say?
Yeah, go ahead.
To the online people, we have it figured out. So ask your question, and put it in the chat room, and I will read it. We've got our act together over here.
All right. All right, what is your question?
Okay. When I talk to people who voted for the president-elect, they say they voted for their vote by their pocketbook. I'm having a tough time understanding how his policy toward immigrants, his tariff policy is not going to adversely affect these people. They're very simplistic in what they're looking for. Can somebody explain to me how that economic plan is going to work? I guess that's my question.
So, John, I'm going to let you start that because, again, John and I spent a lot of time together earlier today, and we were having a conversation about some of this kind of thing, the economic policies.
Yeah.
So, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I just wrote a blog about this. There are a couple of assumptions here. First of all, is the economy really a problem? So if you talk to the big economists, they say it's fine, or at least there's lots of data that says it's fine, other data that doesn't. I think it's kind of like if you go to a doctor. Some of us are old enough in this room where we go to a doctor, they say, you're fine. And you're fine. Yeah, but I want to throw up every day, or I'm sick all the time. But all the data is good. And then sometimes you were fine. Other times it's like it takes many, many visits, a long time before we realize, oh, this is the problem. I feel like that's kind of like our economy. That there's some data that says it's good. There's some real problems going on as well. And in terms of the economic policies, I think that Trump won on that because people are saying that was one of the issues he ran on. He's going to make the economy better. And Kamala really didn't run on that issue. She ran on joy and then Trump sucks. And that was really a campaign. It's not really fair, she didn't have much time. But that was really kind of what came out. And Trump was running on the economy and on immigration and actually even foreign policy and where we are. Now that said, in terms of the logic of it, if you're an economic conservative, there are things you like and things you don't like. So I'm more of an economic conservative. I definitely lean more in the free trade area. But I get, and I've learned that, you know what? it doesn't really matter to somebody who has a pocketbook, where a budget where they're having a lot more trouble paying for their food this week. And you know, I frequently talk about, because I get disturbed in politics, how people think the ends justify the means. And it doesn't, in my mind. And I see stuff on both sides that kind of disgust me. But also the means don't justify the ends. And so you have a lot of folks out in middle America, in the area that group in the middle, we voted for the nice person, we voted for this person, and it's still not getting better. So even if all these ideas sound good and they're nicely discussed, I'm still struggling. And so I think that's where they were like, we're going to go for the guy who's making the economy focused on that. And I think that's what it came down to.
Thank you, John. Hang on one sec.
Hi, I'm Katie Maynard, and I work in the energy sector, so specifically on Workforce of the Future. And given that Texas is the energy capital, and I think we still want to remain the energy transition capital, I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on how this new administration is going to see Texas. A lot of companies are benefiting from the IRA. A lot of traditional oil and gas companies are benefiting from the IRA. So
The Inflation Reduction Act.
Sorry, Inflation Reduction Act. So really curious about that and your view on, how we'll continue to advance climate goals.
Anybody want to speak to that?
Well, I'll take a shot at it.
Okay.
So your concern is how is Texas going to respond to fallout from implementation of certain policies?
Yeah, more so like we are benefiting on both sides of this deal, from what I can tell,
Right.
oil and gas as well as new energy. So what do you see policy-wise that could negatively impact our economy and people who work and live here?
Well, I mean, speaking from my ecosystem, I have an awful lot of clients who work in the petroleum industry. So if you see an actual logistical implementation of what apparently is going to be the policy in this next administration, it's going to absolutely impact oil and gas at a level that I think it's going to hurt. There's going to be an impact. And it'll, my perspective is it'll be very interesting to see how policymakers and stakeholders in the petroleum industry communicate those concerns to the new administration. Kind of like diverging a little bit and going to this gentleman's question, if I could, just real quick. How do you have a conversation about some of these issues? It kind of sort of doesn't make sense. Just to be really transparent, and this is something that I shared with John before we came on, started this panel. I have definitely been guilty of choosing not to have conversations with somebody on the other side because my bias is this is an effort in futility. You're not going to listen to me. I'm not going to listen to you. We're not going to change each other's point of view. So literally, what's the point? And even though I'm very, very concerned about what's going to happen in immigration in the next 4 years, part of what I'm processing since November 5 is I'm going to have those conversations. And so what I'm committed to doing is, and this is something I shared with John, I'm willing to have the conversation. I'm willing to show up and have a conversation in good faith. I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to see if there's any common ground so that I can understand why did you vote for what I think is against your own interests? And somebody might come to the conversation thinking the exact same thing about me. Why are you voting a certain way when you don't want to protect the border, blah, 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 fill in the blank. So I think these conversations are so incredibly important to have given November 5. And so going back to your question, ma'am, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the stakeholders choose to do And how are they going to communicate this up the food chain?
Liz, you are not alone, and I'm so glad you articulated that, because I think there are probably a lot of people who feel that way, that I can't talk to the other side because they're not going to listen. But in reality, there is some commonality, but we have to be willing to have the conversation in order to find it. Okay, online.
Okay, online. Okay, this doesn't.
Yep, go ahead.
Online is coming in, so we're going to go every other one.
Okay.
You have competition, but you have to promise me that this gentleman's next.
He is next. That's
He's
why I'm
next.
standing
Is that
here.
why I'm standing
That's why I'm
he's
standing
been
here.
trying to get our attention. Okay, Louise has a great question. I think this may be for Jay. Would a third party help in the polarization in this country? The political polarization is something I've argued with Karl Rove about for a couple of years. But what do you think? Louise thinks a third party, it's time for a third party. Jay, what do you think? Yeah.
Oh, well, I think
Popular.
Yeah,
done.
Right. Yeah, right.
I mean, I think third parties have done a lot more in American political history than they are given credit for. One of the things that they do is they just shake things up. They disrupt a kind of static political status quo. So if you think about, like in the days before the Civil War, when there was the two parties that were sort of paralyzed, and there was the kind of polarization, which was on a scale, fortunately, far greater or worse than today, a series of third parties came in and peeled off votes. They didn't win national elections, but they accelerated the breakdown of a political order that wasn't delivering the goods, that wasn't getting the job done. And then in clearing the decks, opened up the opportunity for what really was the greatest political innovative upstart in American political history, which was the Republican Party of the 1850s, the party of Abraham Lincoln. You would have never had the party of Abraham Lincoln if you hadn't had these earlier third parties that kind of chipped away at the order. So I think that is the case for me that is most persuasive about why you need a third party. It's not that the third party is going to win an election, or it's not like a single cause is going to solve all of our problems, even if they only get 10, 12% of the vote. It's that they could really get us out of this kind of treadmill kind of treading water cycle that we've been in the last 15 or so years. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, what's your question?
So my name is Omawali, and I'm first somewhat gripped by the explanation that was given about the rise of the militant Latino vote. When the gentleman just explained about the tension with the Venezuelans and the other ethnic groups, that makes sense to me. The second thing that makes sense to me is somebody needs to talk about college educated versus non-college educated, how they voted, and also the elites in DC and Los Angeles versus the swath of working class Americans and how they voted. And the final thing would be that my family and I, we are left of center, but we always appreciated somebody, regardless of party, who had the courage to challenge any of the conventions that we've had about what it meant to be decent and kind. We always loved John McCain and Senator McCain, though we didn't agree with their party. So my question is, how do we get somebody to rise to the mic and call for the kind of decency that Ms. Baker talked about, that George Bush talked about, Herbert Bush, after he was defeated? It seems like if we don't have that, it's going to embolden the extremists.
Such a good point. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Who wants? John, you want to chime in on that one?
So I suspect you probably know the numbers better than I do about the elites, college, non-college. Do you want to speak to that first, and then I'll talk about the ability for us to talk with each other is where everything needs to start. And I do feel it's kind of like that addiction cycle where it's gotten bad. And we now know it's bad. And we have to kind of finish that terrible experience out before we can get better. So it's not like an overnight thing, but that's actually what we're focused on. And that's what my company's focused on. That's what a lot of people in the bridging organizations focus on. That's what Civil Dialogues is focused on. I mean, our goal is to actually have anybody in the nation at any time can actually understand the different sides of an issue and talk to somebody different than they are in a civil way. And being a technology person, I'm building platforms and working with partners so that they can do that for anybody online. Because all you can do online right now is yell at each other in some kind of rude tweet. That is not acceptable. And
and the algorithms feed that.
Exactly, because it leads to more clicks, and they make more money the more you click. So I've been working on business models that reward good behavior and that enable exactly the kind of conversation that you're talking about and exactly the kind of character that I did work in the Bush campaign. So in my bio, I don't say what party because some people get nuts, but I always describe it. I did work for the first Bush, as like one of those young political guys. Didn't always agree with him, but his character is it's what I want to be like. And,
and I'm going to give a shameless plug now for Jean's book because I know she won't do it.
You should.
So for those of you who have not yet picked up a copy and read Character Matters, you really must. It's an incredible read, and I'm just going to say that because I could go on, but it's just it's such an important book right now, and so I will just leave it at that and then let you ask the next question.
I'm going to add a PS to the answer. First of all, I wish I had a copy of my book here with me. I would give you a copy. I loved your question, and it was so important. I just want to say briefly, and I'm going to go back and quote President Bush, the answer is for all of us to get involved. And the fact that you're here tonight, good, that speaks wonders. You could be home on your couch watching Yellowstone or the football game and it was rainy. You came because you care. So you've already taken the first step. And Linda's heard this before, I was complaining one time to President Bush, this was 7 or 8 years ago, about how screwed up I thought the political system was. I was really mad at the Republican Party. And I told him I didn't think I was no longer a Republican. And he looked at me and he said, "You were never that good of one to begin with." It's one of my favorite things he ever said to me. But then he looked at me and he said, "Jean, when's the last time you went to a precinct meeting? When's the last time you volunteered for a campaign? When's the last time you got your hands dirty and became involved?" And it was one of the toughest things he's ever said to me. You know, he was right. I wanted to say if I wasn't working 80 hours a week for you, I would get more involved, but he made a very good point. And so I just want to encourage the place to start is to get involved, get your hands dirty, and by coming here tonight, you took a major first step. Now we're going to go back to an online question. I have no idea which one of you thinks you can answer this, but Jack wants to know if there should be establish a Bitcoin reserve and how that will affect the economy. Good luck.
Well, and maybe there's someone in the audience who can speak to that. Anybody up here want to take a crack?
If somebody feel qualified.
Did you say you are? No, you just have a question. Anybody here know about the Bitcoin world?
I could put a tiny bit of context with it.
Okay. You want to take a crack? Go for it.
Well, I studied math econ here, and I'm fairly young, so I guess I know about crypto. But I would say maybe for a country like the United States, that's not a necessary when we have a central bank that's more stable. But I think definitely countries like El Salvador, Colombia, these countries that have very iffy central banks, I think that might be something we might look into, potentially looking into cryptocurrencies. Now, you could ask, why aren't they investing in American dollars? Well, with inflation, American dollars are becoming a little bit more expensive now. So just from a capital flow perspective and from maybe trying to rely less on the US dollar, it might be worth it for a developing country, or even a developed country who has a bad central bank, like Greece or Turkey. Well, they have the EU, to look into something like that. But for the United States now, I think it's something in the private sector that should be looked at more.
Thank you. We have such a smart audience. Yes. So anybody else want to weigh in on that, or do we just have more questions
I can
here?
add one thing to that, Linda, just quickly.
Yes, please do, John. Okay.
One thing technically about Bitcoin, right now in the US, it's more like a commodity you're buying into. It's more like an equity. It's not really a currency. But the other thing is, like, things are changing. And it's just another example of how communication, which actually some of the kinds of technologies, blockchain technologies actually impact being able to verify something's real or fake. These things are changing dramatically, so don't get comfortable. I mean, we are fixing things as they change, but the speed at which we as a society have to get on board, figure it out, and change it for the better, as opposed to just suffering through the bad times, the early days, that's shrinking. I mean, we all love reading. We're all, when the printing press first came out, we think of the Enlightenment. We think of Reformation. But we forget that the first 100 years were pretty awful, where people were storming the castle and being beaten and being incited to attack each other. And after a generation, people learn the new technology well enough to get the goods out of it, as opposed to just the bads. And part of, I think, what we're doing in the bridging community, which we're part of, is reducing that 100 years of insanity after new technology. If you think the internet as a start, get that down to about 20. And I think we're about 10 years to that. And then before we've even done that, here comes AI, which will have even less time to adapt to. So I think we just have to learn how to learn new things more quickly, not as just individuals, but as a society.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, we have a question here.
Yes, thank you.
I got it.
So this was a major campaign issue for my friends and myself. Do you guys see a national abortion ban coming and or further restrictions on reproductive rights? Thank you.
Yes, Liz.
No, I don't. I don't, and I think one reason, midterms. So I don't see that happening. I really don't. I mean, and I want to be really transparent, that in no way whatsoever is an endorsement at all of who won November 5th. I just think that politically, there are midterms that are just around the corner, and I just don't see that happening. But I hope I'm right.
Okay, I have an online question from Barry, who is talking back to guardrails. He's concerned that the Supreme Court gave Trump immunity.
Yeah.
So what does that do to the guardrails? And he's concerned about recess appointments. So is that you, Jay? Everyone
Yeah.
thinks it's you, Jay.
I guess
Yes,
that's
Jay.
me.
That's you,
It's all
Jay.
yours.
You're on the hot seat.
I share the concern. I think it's a great question. Let me backtrack. Let's talk about like what the Constitution was designed to do, and then we can think about how the Constitution fits in with this very particular problem that we're confronting here. And there's two different dimensions of it. It's about executive authority, isn't it? When we drafted the Constitution almost 200 plus years ago, it was like a tightrope walking act. On the one hand, what clearly was needed was a political order that had enough power and strength, ability to take in money, ability to create security forces, to have a foreign policy, and the strong executive was part of that. Yeah, it was a dangerous world right after the American Revolution. So that's one thing that was needed. But on the other hand, obviously what was needed was there, individual liberties needed to be safeguarded. Power needed to be diffused in a federal system. There was the real concern, actually, that there'd be like another American Revolution against like an internal regime, a centralized regime. So the Constitution's about that tightrope, walking that tightrope. And I think they did it remarkably well. And I think the framework, it doesn't come from God, it comes from fallible people, but it's stood the test of time. But there have been moments in which courts or leaders or voters have got that balance a little bit wrong. And I suspect, or I fear, that that might be the case. I understand what some of the concerns on the flip side with the executive immunity were, that we didn't want the president to be encrusted in endless litigation. And once one guy wins and the next party comes in, we'd see that. And that'd lead to paralysis, that would discredit the government. That is a concern. But I'm concerned that the executive immunity ruling went too far the other way. Now, courts can self-correct. Political systems can self-correct. And that's just a fear. We will see how this plays out. But this is all the more reason why we have to have forums like this and why citizens need to be engaged on this really, really important issue of executive power in a world that's becoming more centralized with kind of strong-arm leaders. So the current is moving in a direction that makes me quite concerned.
If I could piggyback on that real quick, I think part of what's going to impact that is what plays out with the current prosecutions against the president-elect. Because we're in new territory, with a president having this, immunity. And so I think in the next couple of months when we see what happens with all of these different cases around the country, I think it's going to have an impact as far as,
Most of them are being rolled back and put away.
And so many of them are probably going to wind up being dismissed. So we'll see
Exactly.
what happens. Yeah.
Exactly. What's your question or comment?
So the day after the election, I had a very disturbing conversation with someone who was a supporter of Donald Trump. And it was regarding abortion and reproductive rights. And this individual was a steadfast supporter of him and thought that access to abortion was equal in all 50 states and guaranteed in all cases of rape and incest. And when I told them that was not the case, they were very surprised, completely surprised. So my question is this: what, if anything, is being done or can be done to educate the public about basic civics, basics of our government, legislation, public policy, in schools, in media, on the web? Because I'm looking at the title of tonight's event, Let's Talk, but it's difficult to talk when facts, even the most simple, pared down facts, cannot be agreed upon.
I'm so glad you asked this question and framed it the way that you did. I think this speaks to the whole issue that we've been talking about earlier about our information bubbles and how you can watch your news channel or read your newspaper of choice or your social media platform of choice and hear something that is not true and never ever hear the other side. So there's so many parts to that, to answering that question, in terms of just how we're not educating our students in school now do not understand civics. They don't understand how government works. They're not always being taught that. There's the whole media literacy piece of this. John, I'm gonna let you sort of finish off this question here.
First, I've always been pro-choice, so I identify with the concern greatly. The world of not knowing things is nothing new. But it's gotten to another level. So I mean, people thought that when we're going to Iraq, it was because they thought Saddam Hussein blew up the Twin Towers. Sometimes it's very explicitly done. When you go back in early American days, there's a lot of voting going on, things that are just wrong. It's our job. I feel like this personally. I think it's our job, everybody in here, to change the way information is shared in America so people can actually understand what's going on. I take that quite seriously. When I was at Netscape early on the internet, that was the dream. We'd have access to better information and more information. We could make better decisions. We get to know people all around the world by talking to them individually, not as some stereotype. That was the dream. And we in some ways we did that if you look at the broader picture. But when it comes to politics, when it comes to things where lots of money is involved or lots of controversy, in ways we're doing the exact opposite with our technology and systems the way they are today. And that's absolutely changeable. They've changed many times in our lives. It changed dramatically with the internet, changing dramatically with social media, changed dramatically as search engines began using algorithms, changing dramatically with AI. But I don't see the government fixing that. It's up to us, and that's why I'm not in DC. It was kind of fun for a while, but I actually don't think that's where we're really going to find the solution, because it's really about our democracy having not just a free and independent press. It's free today, it's not that independent. But having all of our ability for information to get to what's going on. And there will always be people who don't know that stuff. You'll always find examples. But we need to enable more people to find out what's really going on more easily and talk with each other across differences. Like you, I love the way you set it up. That's exactly right to set it up.
John,
and that's something we can do.
So, and just so, I think we might have said it before, but we are definitely going to be doing a civil dialogue or 2 or 3 on media next year. So do watch for that, and I know we'll partner with our journalism school for sure to do at least one of them. So there's so much to talk about there. Okay, what is your question or comment?
Yeah, I want to know your opinion about the role of Elon Musk in the new administration. I think it's for Jonathan.
Ooh, I can't wait to hear that answer.
That one, or I can't do that one?
Okay, Liz. She's volunteering to go there. Okay.
Project 2025 wants to eliminate H-1Bs, so which is a visa for professionals. So I think in my bubble, in my immigration sphere, I think he's going to actually maybe have some influence regarding the business side of immigration that might be positive, but not for the rest. As far as immigration. So I think he's going to have some influence. He has a lot of money, and a lot of people like him and think that he's brilliant and a genius. And we'll see how long he stays in Trump's orbit. But I think, on the theme of immigration, I think he's going to be very pro. Look, I mean, we need to make some changes and reforms to immigration that better serves our national interests and our economy. And I would welcome that. I just lament that it's going to be focused on this one slice of immigration and not the rest. But yeah, I think he's going to be around for a while.
I mean, in America, because we don't think of our society as being one structured by economic class, we tend to think of politics as somehow separate from the internal distribution of social power. But it so clearly isn't and never has been separate. It's part of it. So it's not a surprise at all if you step back and look at the sweep of history that, in our age of concentrated power and socioeconomic inequality, that we would see new figures emerge from the economic realm and then kind of insert themselves into our political system seamlessly. So seamlessly that it's almost like naturalized and normalized. So I see the Musk thing not really being about Musk or Trump, but being about our social order in the 21st century.
Okay, your question or comment?
So it's a question for the history professor. Do you expect there to be a realignment within the Democratic Party? It feels like for the last 30 years, it's really been a story of the Obamas or the Clintons. Do you expect that to change in terms of who's going to be leading the Democratic Party moving forward?
We never ask a history professor a prediction. The only thing a history professor can predict, if you haven't heard that, you guys haven't heard this one, good. The only thing a history professor can predict is what history professors 50 years from now will think is interesting and important. And yeah, I do think that there's, in the midst of a realignment, I don't think it's like one party or the other changing. I don't think it's about necessarily this group of voters now maybe are going to vote for the other party. I mean, those things matter. But I think what matters more is that structural change. And I would say, to go back to the immigration things, we got away from immigration. It was such a wonderful case for why we should have immigration reform that was made earlier. And it's a real indictment of our system today that we are not able to implement what seems to be like the obvious solution. Everyone was nodding their head. But when we do that, if we ever do, which would look something like decrease immigration through border control, yeah? But find a solution for the immigrants and the children of immigrants that are living here. That's going to have a profound effect on American politics and society in the next quarter century, half century. And the reason I'm confident saying that is because I know that as a historian, when we shut our borders one other time in our history, in the 1920s, it had unanticipated, far-reaching consequences for our political life. The New Deal would never have happened without immigration restriction. And that is not what the architects of immigration restriction wanted. The New Deal, they did not want that. But because you have no new immigrants, it helps to create, for the first time, a more coherent working class. And that working class, those old ethnic divisions over time begin to die off. And the workers become part of a new political coalition, the Democratic Party, and the New Deal is about empowering them and redistributing wealth and power. So one could see something like that happening, and the Republicans and the Democrats competing for working class votes from all races and ethnicities. I think that'd be actually quite healthy in the long term if it happens. So yes, I do think we're on the cusp of a change. I wouldn't limit it to one party or the other, and we can't really predict where it might go, but it's clearly far-reaching, and our political system needs to be more responsive to the needs of our people and our changing economy.
Once again, the context of history, it's so important. Thank you for that, Jay. What's your question or comment?
I've got two, so thank you guys. So first, on the history side, history I find rarely repeats exactly, but rhymes very often. And so with the internet, it's a lot like you were saying, like the printing press, totally new technological innovation. In the Wild West, right, which is kind of what the internet is now, it's a tough guy place. You just have a bunch of tough, kind of macho personalities, and they run the show until things mellow out. So first question is, historically, how does that work? Or I mean, it's a hard, long question, but generally, how does it go from, what's the progression from tough guy Wild West to civilized Houston? In maybe a paragraph. And the other question I have is, technologically, I'm on Twitter all the time, and it seemed to me the youth on Twitter knew who was going to win this election, and it was no question. Yeah. Everyone that was in a younger age group was like, yeah, Trump's going to take it. Yeah. So my question is this: because the youth knew that, and because they know the internet, I think a little better than maybe the traditional media, how much do you think the traditional media's bias hurt them? And on which side? So was the Democrat bias worse for the Democrats than the Republican bias was for the Republicans?
Such good questions.
That's good stuff.
Okay, John, you want to start that off?
So in terms of the paragraph answer to how that changes, I see it like the adoption curve. That curve where you have early adopters, innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of goes like that. But that's happening in many different places at the same time. So as we're getting better, I actually think that's happening in the internet and how we communicate. So there are things replacing each other over and over again. And I am being a little bit glass half full in seeing that people now understand that the current system is really broken. And in terms of who is more off, the traditional left or traditional right media, I mean, that's just kind of like they're all missing it. And the betting and the international betting markets understood the election better than the press do. The press is basically, the legacy press is a bit of an established organization that's a little bit out of touch. I always joke, it's like they seem to be the last people to figure things out. And unfortunately, the replacement today is a bunch of rumor mongering online of God knows what, with a bunch of stuff that's true and not true and everything else. So there is, in my mind, and this is, of course, why All Sides is around, is I think there's a huge gap and need for society to get to the next place. I also see a big business opportunity there. And being a guy who's too impatient for the government to get their act together, I see I had to put those together to really make a better place for our society, make a good business model for a better change that helps us all. That was a little bit longer than a paragraph. I blew that. But that, I feel like I missed a part of the question. Did that get you okay? Or?
Yeah, sort of. It was good in the first part. The second part, though, was
I like this.
it was just that. Yes, there's a lot of rumor mongering, but the youth knew.
Yeah.
It wasn't that it was rumors all around it. It wasn't like kind of everyone's wrong, so it's a guess that we're gonna. No, it was solid, and in that respect, the legacy media missed it.
Yes.
And so I guess what I'm asking
bias blinds people, whether they're in the media or not. Bias blinds us, and we often get caught into those bubbles. So sometimes we're blinded, particularly those of us who want to be more knowledgeable. We were taught we're supposed to read the press, and sometimes that makes us stupider. Hate to say it, because they are kind of picking their lane, and they often choose stories based on a narrative they believe. So rather than being a logical, let's look at things balanced, they're so caught up in their own narrative, and they have so much less time to do the research than they used to do, that they're even more susceptible to being misled by their own biases, that they actually miss it.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry, but we've got a couple more people back here
we'll
that have some questions. You guys can continue afterwards.
Well, we're going to geek out afterwards.
Okay,
Anybody
what's your
wants to
question?
join us, we can do that.
So the term, we need immigration reform gets thrown around a lot, but I want tangible examples of that, if that's okay, and maybe also like in comparison of how easy it is to legally immigrate now versus maybe 10 years, 20 years ago, like what's that comparison look like for people who are trying to legally immigrate?
Tangible reform for immigration, tangible policies for immigration reform. Pass legislation for DACA, pass the Afghan Adjustment Act, pass legislation for people in TPS, get rid of the 3 and 10 year bar, bring back 245I, give us a rebuttable presumption of hardship for cancellation of removal. I mean, I could talk your ear off about it. So all of these smart, our leaders have a lot of smart people who give them all sorts of policy papers telling them you can do these 100 things. So they're very, very tangible, real world things that can be done. There was a bipartisan proposal this year to address border security, tightening up our asylum laws, and it failed, and we all know why it failed. So that would have put more agents on the border, risen the burden to have a successful asylum claim. It would have provided a lot more money for more infrastructure, more immigration judges, more asylum officers, and it didn't happen. So there's a lot of real world, very tangible things that can be done to change our immigration laws. And how much difficult or how longer is it now? How difficult? In my world, we have a saying called Fix 96, because under President Bill Clinton, with the D next to his name, we got some absolutely awful immigration legislation that has really had some really negative unintended consequences. There were certain things in the immigration laws that changed in 1996 and 1997 that helped create why we have over 10 million people in this country without status. So wait times can shift with administrations. We saw that processing times for a lot of immigration cases during Trump administration #1 went through the roof, came down a little bit under Biden. They will definitely go through the roof again under President Trump, because so many resources are going to be taken away from processing cases to the border. And there's just not enough resources to go around. So if I take resources away from you to give to him, he waits.
We have time for one more question, and then we're going to let you guys get out of here.
Really, thank you. First of all, thank you for your time. Talking about the commerce between Mexico and the U.S., Mexico is the first commercial partner of the U.S. And next president is telling that he's going to impose more duties, more taxes on the goods from Mexico. What are the main impacts from the customers here in the USA, from people who live here? I live here. So in terms of facing increasing of the prices of the products, because it's not easy to mix, to dissolve the relationship we have with Mexico. This is the first question. And second is talking about the drug cartels. Trump is saying that he's going to call them as terrorist units. So is he really going to do the first one, increasing the duties, and second one, is he really going to do something with the drug cartels? What do you think about it?
Thank you. You take or you take? Okay.
I could take the first part. I mean, I don't think Mexico ever really paid for the wall. So, you know, I think there's going to be, I think we're going to see a course correction on the whole tariff policy. I mean, I could be wrong, obviously.
Yeah.
So.
One way of looking at that is thinking about when Trump was in office earlier, he used the threat of tariffs to get concessions from the other countries during negotiations. And so it's unclear whether he's going to do the thing that everybody who doesn't like Trump thinks he'll do, oh my God, or whether he'll use it as a negotiating tactic. I mean, he did have some success. They didn't pay for the wall, but he did get them to keep some of the folks coming up from Venezuela through Mexico there and not come through the border. And that was a negotiation deal. So I think we may be a little bit too certain about predicting what's going to happen. I do see it as open possibilities. I'm not quite sure what'll be happening.
Tariffs are like Pringles, the chips. Once you pop, you can't stop. You have one, and then you're like, ooh, that was
that
good.
Sounds good, yeah.
Next time I'm going to have two or three. And then, of course, other countries are doing it. I mean, that's the thing. The outline I said about, you know, from free trade to tariffs and high immigration to immigration restriction and international instability, that's not just us. That's the world that we live in. We don't create or determine that. I mean, America's relative power is quite different right now than it was 15, 20 years ago. So tariffs is a sign of that, and tariffs are just inherently destabilizing, and I think for our alliance systems in particular. And you mentioned Mexico. The Europeans, of course, are very anxious right now about what the impacts of tariffs are going to be, and the volatility, the uncertainty. So even if it is a negotiating ploy, it just creates uncertainty in economic and also in geopolitical regards.
Tariffs are like Pringles. I'll never forget.
They may be the quote of the night.
That may be the quote of the night. How about a round of applause for our incredible panel? Thank you guys so much for coming, for staying, for being engaged, and really, really appreciate it. We do have one more surprise for you before you go, and before I turn it over to Jean to tell you about it. A reminder to please fill out the survey, the QR code up on the screen that you saw if you haven't done it. Sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media, and stay engaged with us and each other, please. And if you'd like to share your thoughts about tonight in a brief on-camera interview for the Civil Dialogues documentary, which I am producing, please join me at the back of the room in just a couple of minutes, and I'd be happy to hear what you thought about tonight. Jean, you're on.
Okay, for those of you who aren't going to race home for the Texans game, we've been bleeding people for the last 20 minutes. We knew it'd be a heavy night, heavy questions, heavy answers, so we have a surprise for you. In December of 1992, about a month after President Bush lost the election, the entire White House staff was summoned to the East Room of the White House for an address from the president. And the rumors were wild that he was going to resign early, that we didn't know what he was going to do. We were a nervous wreck. So we all crammed into the East Room of the White House. This video was 14 minutes. Linda has edited it down to 7. It is worth your time to stay and watch to see what the President of the United States, who had just been fired by the American people, his words, not mine, why he summoned us to the East Room. Can we see the video? And panelists, you need to come sit down. It's only 7 minutes.
First thing I notice is podiums for the other guy over there. Feel like Billy Barty up here. Kind of short down in this area down here. Would love to be up here, but I'm down here. This is very, very strange. I was staying in the Lincoln bedroom last night, and I couldn't resist getting on the phone, and I called up the Secret Service as the president. Feel like going jogging tonight. In the nude. My wife and I were looking out on the lawn around midnight, and these guys were fully unclothed. Well, it's good to have, I've been studying him since yesterday, and I think I've actually, the way to do the president is to start out with Mr. Rogers. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Then you add a little John Wayne. Here we go, let's go over the ridge. You put them together, you got George Herbert Walker Bush. That's the thing there. Now, thank you. It's a tough crowd. So we've had a lot of fun over the years together. He called me at home, which is a trip, I gotta tell you. To be on the phone, I was doing an interview with People magazine. They said, hold for the president. And your heart just starts, there's something about hold. Dana, how you doing? You know? And at first you're like, come on, who is this? Well, thought you might come out, you know, being a little nostalgic, thought you'd come out. Been quite a year. Got a little nauseous there in Tokyo. Should have seen the look on the Prime Minister's face there. Oh, Mr. Bush, you look like you're going to bro chunk. Was, sort of a... No, I did use the hand. The hand, there's a lot of hands with the president. You know, a lot of different gestures, as you know. The first one I noticed was sort of the hitchhiker, this one. Those people down over there doing that. And then there's 2 6 guns up here doing that thing. Then the wandering index, that fella down there. Put them together. And then the staple. You kind of got... So, of course, I completely exaggerated it, you know. But in all fairness, on Saturday Night Live, you know, we do everyone. We do Bill Clinton. We do Ross Perot. Of course, I did do Ross Perot. And here is the deal, see. Now, he's got one eye almost shut like that, see. Here it is. Now, Christmas season. Isn't this nice? I love those Christmas songs. Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. Now, what the hell is a red-nosed reindeer? Well, that was good. Not as good as when he does me, though. I will be doing things next year. Got a lot of big plans. Going to challenge Bobby Fischer for the World Chess Championship. Going to enter the triathlon competition over there in Hawaii. First you got to swim. Then you ride that bike, and then you end up running 26.2 miles. Not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture. That was the other one. Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture. That thing, doing that thing. Now, I always did this thing. I always said that the president goes, it's bad, it's bad. But you only did it once. I did it for 4 years, he did it once, so. I don't know, do you want to come on up, or? Never mind. I just want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and thank you very, very much. And God bless you all. And wasn't he lucky I didn't hit him right on the head?
I want to. Don't dare move my hands. What I want to do. No, but I am very grateful to Dana and to Paula for being here. And Dana's given me a lot of laughs. He said to me on the phone, "You sure you really want me to come there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I hope I've never crossed the line." And I knew exactly what he meant. And as far as I'm concerned, he never has. And the fact that we can laugh at each other is a very fundamental thing. I'm not sure on November 4th that the invitation would have gone out and had the same enthusiasm, but we're shifting gears, and I think he's given us a wonderful kickoff to what I hope will be a joyous, totally friendly, very happy, somewhat nostalgic, but Merry Christmas for everybody. In a few minutes, Barbara shows the press through this spectacular house that we've been privileged to live in for 4 years, and we wanted to share with some of you. I wish we could have had everybody the majesty of this place, which I hope many will get to see in these various receptions and all, but I think there's something special seeing it for the first time when it's just beginning. And so let me take this opportunity once again to thank Dana Carvey for brightening our lives, giving us a little joy, and wish each and every one of you a Merry Christmas, and we can never adequately say thanks for all you've done for us, for your country, and for the Bush family. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
He knew that humor was important, being a good sport was important, but even just watching that video is a great life lesson. You just carry on with a smile. Good night. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming, everybody.